7:14 on a Saturday evening. Wesley Coltrane stood beneath the copper and glass dome of the Ashbury Conservatory, his son Henley gripping his hand, an embossed invitation in the other W. Coltrane, Heritage Preservation category. The doorman scanned the code and shook his head. Trent Hollister stepped forward, eyes traveling from Wesley's worn boots to the collar of his flannel shirt, and smiled. "There's a dress code for this event, sir. I'll have to ask you to leave." Inside, through the glass doors, Marin Ashbury Vale paused mid-greeting in front of a row of donors, her gaze caught on Wesley's hand, resting on his son's shoulder. Wesley did not argue. He crouched down on one knee, adjusted the wool scarf around Henley's neck, and tucked a loose end inside the boy's coat. "We'll go around back," he said softly. "Get the truck, head home." Henley did not ask why. The boy had grown used to grown-ups saying the words, "Please leave." He had heard them in waiting rooms, at bus stops, once at a free clinic where a receptionist had decided his father did not look like the right kind of patient. Henley had learned, by the age of 6, that adults sometimes made decisions before they had information. Trent watched them go, then nodded to 2 security officers near the velvet rope. One of them, a woman in a navy blazer with the name Della stitched on her badge, turned away, her clipboard pressed tight against her chest as if she meant to keep something from falling out of it. On the way to the parking lot, Henley stopped before the southern granite wall. He laid his small palm against the recessed scrollwork chiseled into the stone. The pattern repeated in long, narrow bands, oak leaves bending into one another, cut shallow so the shadow at certain angles read like text. "Dad," he said, "this pattern looks like the one you draw in your notebook." Wesley did not answer right away. The cold had begun to bite at his knuckles. He looked at the wall for a moment longer than he needed to. "Maybe I saw it somewhere a long time ago." Henley looked up at him. "Were you here before?" Wesley held a beat too long. "A long time ago, son. Come on, let's get you in the warm." Inside the conservatory, beneath the chandelier, Marin stood beside her father. Edmund Ashbury sat in a wheelchair, 71 years old, a tartan blanket folded across his knees and a thin oxygen line running beneath his nose. She bent toward his ear. "Dad, the man they just turned away at the door. Did you recognize him?" Edmund furrowed his brow. The skin on his face was tissue paper thin now, but his eyes had not lost their focus. "I couldn't see well from here. Why do you ask?" Marin said nothing. Her eyes stayed fixed on the closed glass door, on the faint impression 2 sets of footprints had left in the dusting of frost on the stone outside. In the truck, Henley opened his sketchbook to a page he had drawn the week before, a curved dome, copper ribs, light spilling down through panels in long wedges. "From imagination," he had said when his father had asked. Wesley glanced at it now, swallowed, and said nothing. He turned the key. The engine took 2 cranks to catch. Marin separated herself from the crowd and walked toward Della. Her champagne flute sat untouched on a passing tray, who was just turned away at the door. "Della." Della answered carefully, with the particular care of a woman who had been answering carefully for many years. "A guest, not on the updated list, ma'am." Marin studied her. "Name?" Della lowered her eyes to the clipboard. "W. Coltrane." Marin did not react at first. She returned to the main hall, lifted a fresh flute of champagne, and smiled at a donor from the Charleston Historical Society who was talking about the renovation of the Battery seawall, but her hand trembled, very faintly, against the stem of the glass, and she set the flute down at the next opportunity without drinking. Wesley pulled out of the parking lot. The taillights of his truck disappeared behind the row of old live oaks that had stood there long before the conservatory was built, long before Charleston had decided what kind of city it was going to be. Henley dozed against the seatbelt, sketchbook still open on his lap. The boy did not stir when his father reached across to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. Wesley drove the long way home, past the harbor, past the shuttered storefronts on East Bay Street. The river was the color of slate. He did not turn on the radio. At a red light, he looked at his own hands on the wheel, calloused, clean, the wedding ring he no longer wore, long since put away in a small wooden box on his dresser. He had not stood beneath that dome in 7 years. He had told himself he never would again. He had not expected the name on the invitation to be his. He had not expected Henley to say, "The pattern looks like yours." He had not expected, walking toward the door, to feel the building recognize him before anyone inside did. The light turned green. Wesley drove on. 11 o'clock at night. Marin returned to her private office at the conservatory, opened the wall safe behind her father's old portrait, and lifted out a deep Navy archive box, the original design dossier her father had kept since 2018. The first page, typed in dignified serif. Lead architect, Wesley A. Coltrane, Farron, and Halsey Architects, Boston, Massachusetts. She turned the page. A photograph from the spring of 2019, taken on the unfinished mezzanine. Wesley standing beside Edmund, both men looking up into the half-completed dome, Wesley younger, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a roll of drawings tucked under one arm. Beneath the image, a typed caption in the careful hand of her father's longtime secretary, Pritzker Prize nominee, 2017. Co-author, Light and Bone Architecture as Memory, Yale University Press, 2016. Lead designer, Boston Children's Memorial Atrium, 2015. Marin set the photograph on the desk and turned the next page. A contract dated 2021, after Wesley had left Farron and Halsey. Trent Hollister had pressured Della Marchetti into signing a non-disclosure agreement that stripped Wesley's name from every public record of the conservatory, plaques, brochures, the donor wall, the architectural registry, the AIA citation file. In exchange, Della had been promoted to Director of Preservation. Her signature at the bottom of the NDA was small and tight, as if she had tried to write it without taking up space. Marin laid her hand flat against the page. Her father had once told her about a young architect he lost his wife midway through the project, finished the building alone, and disappeared. She had never asked the name. She had been 29 then, working in London, and her father had told her the story over the phone in the summer he was first diagnosed. Across the river, Wesley pulled into his driveway in Park Circle, North Charleston. The house was a small two-bedroom with a steep gable and a porch he had built himself the second year after they moved. He carried Henley in from the truck, eased him into bed, and set the sketchbook on the desk beside the lamp. He stood a long moment, looking at the page with the dome on it. Then he closed the cover and switched off the lamp. He sat at the kitchen table, brewed a pot of black coffee, and looked out the window at the bare branches of the dogwood tree. On the shelf behind him, draped under a thin linen cloth, were two things he had not uncovered in years, a wedding photograph with Catherine and a small bronze medallion etched with the words AIA Honor Award, 2018. His phone buzzed against the table, an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. At the same moment, in Trent Hollister's empty office at the conservatory, Marin stood over his desk and turned the pages of his calendar. A line in his own handwriting, dated 3 weeks earlier. Coltrane has registered for heritage preservation. Remove before the event. Reason historical conflict of interest. Marin took a photograph of the entry with her phone. She sent it to Della with one line of text. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. My office. Bring everything. Della received the message at 11:47, sat upright in bed, and read it 3 times. She got up, went to the closet, and lifted down a paper box she had kept on the top shelf for 7 years, behind a stack of folded sweaters her late husband had once owned. Inside were copies of every document Trent had ordered her to destroy. She had never told anyone the copies existed. She had not been sure, until this moment, whether she had kept them for evidence or for absolution. Wesley stepped onto his small back porch, breath visible in the November cold. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug and watched the steam pull apart in the air. He did not know that by sunrise, the quiet he had built around himself was no longer his to keep. 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Della arrived at Marin's office and set the paper box on the desk. Her hands trembled slightly when she lifted it down. I kept these, she said. If you fire me for breaking the NDA, I understand. I should have brought them to your father long before he got sick. I didn't have the courage. Marin did not answer. She opened the box. Inside, Wesley's original hand-drawn elevations on yellow tracing paper softened at the edges, construction photographs in dated envelopes, material notes in his small, precise handwriting, and a sealed letter, addressed to Edmund Ashbury, dated October 2020. Wesley's notice that he would leave architecture once the conservatory was complete. The reason given in 2 lines: "My wife passed 3 weeks ago. I am not coming back to this work after this building." Marin read the letter twice. She looked up at Della. "Do you have his current address?" Della nodded and pushed a slip of paper across the desk. "He runs a small wood shop in North Charleston. He doesn't take new commissions. He restores old furniture for a few long-time clients. He raises his son alone." Across town, Wesley was making breakfast: toast, scrambled eggs, orange juice. Henley sat at the table in his pajamas, watching his father crack eggs one-handed. After a minute, he asked, "Dad, yesterday, when they didn't let us in, why?" Wesley set the spatula down and turned the burner low. He thought a moment. "Sometimes people look at the outside of a person and decide, that isn't your fault. It isn't ours either." Henley nodded and went back to eating. A knock at the door. Wesley wiped his hands on the dish towel and opened it. Marin stood on the porch, alone. She wore a gray wool coat, no jewelry, almost no makeup. Her car was parked at the end of the drive. "Mr. Coltrane, my name is Marin Ashbury Vale. I'm here to apologize for last night." Wesley did not speak for several seconds. He recognized her. He had seen her photograph on the donor board in 2019, when she had still been the foundation's vice chair. He said only, "You didn't have to come here." "I did. My father kept a box of papers. Trent Hollister never had the authority to remove your name from that building. I came to tell you I am going to fix it." Henley appeared behind his father, sketchbook tucked under one arm. He looked up at Marin and held the book out. "Do you know this building?" "I drew it." Maureen took the sketchbook and looked at the page. Her hand went very still. She raised her eyes to Wesley, and what flickered there she folded away before he could name it. Wesley invited her in and poured her coffee. They sat across from each other at the old pine kitchen table. "I want you to come back to the event," Marin said. "The official Heritage Preservation Award is next Saturday. You were the original nominee, before Trent removed your name. The board still has the file." Wesley shook his head. "I don't need awards anymore, Miss Ashbury Vale." "Then come for your son." He drew his father's building in his notebook without knowing it. He should know that some things in this city were made by him. Wesley was quiet for a long time. He watched Henley peek around the doorway, then disappear back into the living room. Finally, he said, "I'll think about it." Marin stood. She left her card on the table. At the door, she turned back. "Henley, a good name. Did his mother choose it?" Wesley nodded. Marin nodded once in return and was gone. The week that followed unfolded mostly through email. Marin sent the award schedule, the guest list, the draft program. Wesley replied in short sentences, accurate, polite, distant. He wrote in the same lowercase he had always used for professional correspondence, with no signature line. He had not used his middle initial in 7 years. On the 3rd day, Marin attached a scanned image of the letter Wesley had written her father in October 2020. She wrote one line beneath it. "I think you should have the original. My father kept it because he respected you." Wesley did not reply to that email. But the following evening, he drove to the conservatory alone, after closing time. Della unlocked the side door for him without a word and stepped back into the hall. She did not follow him in. She understood that the building belonged, in some measure, to him in a way that did not require accompaniment. He walked the building slowly. He laid his hand on the limestone columns, the carved cornices, the brass thresholds. 7 years ago, he had drawn every centimeter of this place at a desk in Boston, with Catherine sitting across from him sketching variations in the margins. She had chosen the dome's copper ribbing. She had argued for the south wall's recessed scrollwork. She had laughed at him, gently, when he tried to talk her out of the leaf motif because he thought it was too soft. On the second-floor balcony, he found Marin already standing there, alone. She did not seem surprised to see him. "Della told me you might come." They stood side by side, not looking at each other, looking instead at the dome. "My father called this building a prayer for someone," Marin said. "He never told anyone for whom." Wesley spoke quietly. "For my wife." Marin nodded and did not ask anything more. The next day, Henley asked to come along to the woodshop. He brought his sketchbook. Halfway through the morning, he asked, "Dad, is Miss Marin coming back?" Wesley paused the hand plane mid-stroke. "Maybe." Henley nodded as if this confirmed something. "She liked my notebook." By the weekend, Marin had invited them both to a private preview of a preservation exhibit. No guests, no press, just the curatorial staff finishing the last labels. Wesley accepted. Henley wore a blue button-down he had picked out himself and brought the sketchbook tucked under his arm like a passport. At the exhibit, Marin walked Henley through small architectural models, churches in the Low Country, plantation barns, a Charleston single house in cross-section, a model of an old rice mill no one had bothered to build twice. Wesley followed a step behind, watching. He saw Marin crouch to Henley's eye level to explain a roof joint, her hand sketching the angle in the air between them. The gesture was unrehearsed and somehow practiced at the same time, the way some people are with children they have never had. When Henley wandered off to look at a model of an old footbridge, Marin and Wesley stopped in front of an old photograph, the conservatory, under construction in 2019, Wesley visible in the background with a hard hat and a roll of drawings. Marin spoke quietly. "Trent knows you'll be there Saturday. He's preparing something." I assumed he was. She looked at him. "You aren't afraid?" "I have lost a lot already," Wesley said. "Fear doesn't have much room left in me." Marin held his gaze a moment longer, then turned to call Henley over. The distance between them had closed. Neither of them mentioned it. Trent learned, through an assistant on Marin's staff, that the Foundation chair had requested the 2018 archive files. He understood at once what that meant. He was not afraid of a lawsuit. He was afraid of losing his chair before the year-end audit, before the bonus pool was set, before the donor recognition gala in February, at which he was scheduled to be honored. He called Bradley Whitfield, chairman of the Foundation board, and his Tuesday golf partner. Trent painted a careful picture. Wesley Coltrane had been emotionally unstable since his wife's death. He had left the profession under murky circumstances. Bringing him back into the spotlight would damage the conservatory's reputation, just as the capital campaign was opening. Bradley listened. He did not dismiss the call. He had sat on enough boards over enough decades to know that the man asking him to sound an alarm was usually the one starting the fire. But he also knew that uncertainty in front of donors was expensive. He asked Trent for evidence. Trent contacted his old counsel and pulled an internal personnel memo from Farron and Halsey, dated November 2020, a memo noting only that Wesley had left the firm during a personal crisis. By the time Trent forwarded it to Bradley, the language had been edited to suggest that the firm had questioned Wesley's fitness to continue practicing. 2 adjectives had been changed. The signature block had been left intact. That same afternoon, Della called Marin. Trent asked Archives to release the original 2018 file to him. I refused. He told me I'd be terminated by Friday. Marin's voice did not change. "You hold the line. I'm behind you." Della was quiet a long second. "Miss Marin, I have lived with shame for 7 years for signing that NDA. Thank you." Marin called the Ashbury family attorney that evening and asked her to draft a hold harmless letter and a parallel filing for board review in case Trent escalated to the press. Wesley knew none of this. He took Henley out for pizza on Wednesday night and helped him through long division homework afterward. Henley asked, "Dad, what if Saturday they don't let us in again?" Wesley smiled faintly. "This time I have a real ticket, and someone invited us." "Miss Marin?" Wesley nodded. Thursday night, Marin texted him. "I need to talk to you before Saturday. Trent is arranging something. I don't want you walking in cold." They met Friday evening at a small coffee shop on King Street. Marin told him what she knew, the doctored memo, the call to Bradley, the maneuvering around the board vote. Wesley listened, nodded, did not raise his voice. He stirred his coffee once and set the spoon on the saucer. "You've done more than you needed to," he said. "This isn't for you," Marin answered. "It's for my father, for Della, because the right thing needs doing." Wesley looked at her. "You say that, but you came to my house Sunday morning. No one on the board asked you to do that." Marin did not answer. She did not deny it. When they left the shop, a thin rain had started. Marin had no umbrella. Wesley opened his and held it over her head, walking her to the curb. They said nothing in those 20 steps. Marin slid into her car, looked back at him through the rain-streaked window, and nodded once. Then she pulled away. Wesley stood in the rain a few seconds longer, the umbrella still open in his hand. 7 o'clock Saturday evening, the Ashbury Conservatory glowed against the dark. Wesley arrived with Henley. Both wore simple dark suits. Wesley's a charcoal he had not put on in 4 years. Henley's a navy he had outgrown an inch at the wrists. This time Wesley had a real VIP credential, signed by Marin, in a clear plastic sleeve clipped to his lapel. Trent stood near the door, his smile rigid as he greeted them. Della stood inside the threshold and gave Wesley a small nod. Her hands were steady tonight. Wesley noticed. Wesley and Henley moved through the main hall. The room held maybe 200 guests, donors, preservationists, 2 state senators, the dean of the College of Charleston's architecture program. Marin was already at the podium, opening the evening. She saw them. Her cadence did not change. When the program reached the Heritage Preservation Award, Marin spoke into the microphone. This year, we recognize the lead architect who designed this building, a man whose name was removed from our public record 7 years ago through an administrative decision that should never have been made. I would like to invite Mr. Wesley Coltrane to the stage. A wave of murmuring ran through the room. Trent's face went white. Before Wesley could rise, Edmund Ashbury was wheeled to the platform by his nurse. Marin stepped aside. Edmund lifted the microphone with a hand that trembled but held. His voice was thin, but every word landed. 7 years ago, when Catherine Coltrane died, Wesley came to see me. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for credit. He asked for one thing: to finish this building alone, anonymously, and to redirect his lead architect's fee, $420,000, into a scholarship trust for the children of the construction workers killed in the scaffold collapse during the second-year build. That trust includes the son of Trent Hollister, a child Trent has never publicly acknowledged. The room went absolutely silent. A waiter set a tray down without a sound. Trent stood frozen at the side of the stage. Edmund continued. I agreed to keep Wesley's name off the building because he asked. I did not agree to have his name erased. That was Trent's decision, not mine, not my daughter's. Trent moved toward the platform, reaching for the microphone. 2 security officers, the same 2 who had escorted Wesley out the prior week, stepped in front of him on Marin's signal. Wesley walked to the stage. The applause did not start until he had reached the second step. He took the framed citation in both hands. He did not give a long speech. I designed this building while my wife was dying, he said. She told me make the light fall where people need it most. I tried. If anyone in this room feels that light tonight, the credit belongs to her, not to me. He turned to the audience and called Henley up. The boy walked to the stage with his sketchbook clutched in both hands and stood beside his father, the way a small lieutenant stands beside a general at a memorial. Wesley laid his hand on his son's shoulder and said nothing more. Marin stood behind them at the edge of the platform, eyes bright but dry. Della stood at the back corner of the room, both hands flat on the table beside her, and finally allowed herself to exhale a breath she had been holding for 7 years. Trent was escorted out by Foundation counsel through the side corridor. No shouting, no spectacle. A quiet, irrevocable removal. The string quartet, which had paused mid-piece, picked up where it had stopped. 11 o'clock at night. The hall was empty. Staff folded chairs in the back. Henley slept on a padded bench in the lounge, his head resting on his father's coat, his sketchbook open beside him. Wesley stood on the second-floor balcony, the same place he had stood with Marin a week earlier. Marin came up the stairs and set 2 paper cups of coffee on the rail beside him. They were quiet for a while. Then Marin spoke. My father kept that secret for 7 years. He never told me. He promised me he wouldn't. Why did he tell tonight? Wesley turned his head toward her. Maybe he saw that you had begun to understand why this building exists. Marin looked out at the dome. $420,000. You gave up everything. I didn't give it up. I moved it. There's a difference. A long silence. Then Marin spoke again. Trent will be charged with falsification of business records and fraudulent inducement on the NDA. The board voted before the event. If my father said anything tonight, Trent was finished. My father had it ready a week ago. Wesley nodded. He took no satisfaction in it. And his son? The boy on the scholarship? Still on it. The trust is in your name and Catherine's. No one can touch it. I had counsel verify the language this morning. Wesley closed his eyes for a beat. You checked that. I checked everything. Della came up the stairs carrying a small wooden box. She held it out to Wesley with both hands. This is yours. I've kept it for 7 years. I'm sorry I did not return it sooner. Wesley opened the box. Inside lay the bronze medallion of the AIA Honor Award from 2018, the one he had refused to accept the month after Catherine's death. Della had gone to the ceremony in his place, accepted it on his behalf, and put it away in her bottom desk drawer, then in her closet at home when Trent had begun searching offices for traces of Wesley's name. Wesley looked at her a long time. You don't owe me an apology, Della. You kept it. That was enough. Della nodded, eyes red, and went back down the stairs. Wesley and Marin were alone again. She asked, Will you go back to it? The work? I don't know. Maybe a small project. Not Boston, not the prizes, just something that means something. Marin looked at the floor of the hall below, at the empty chairs in their neat rows. The conservatory is adding an education wing, community design, art classrooms, a small wood shop for school children. The board is looking for an architect. We'd like the application open, not closed. Wesley looked at her. She did not press. She let the sentence stand between them. I'll think about it, he said. Marin nodded and allowed herself a small smile, the first all evening. Henley woke and walked out onto the balcony, rubbing his eyes. He looked at Marin, then at his father, then back at Marin. Miss Marin, could I come and watch you work sometime? Marin crouched down to his height. Anytime you want, Henley. Wesley lifted his son against his shoulder and nodded goodnight to her. They walked down the stairs and out the side door. Marin stayed on the balcony alone, watching until Wesley's truck pulled out of the gate and the taillights vanished into the trees. 2 weeks after the event, the Charleston Post and Courier ran a small piece about Wesley, nothing sensational, a careful column inch on the architect who had quietly funded a scholarship for the children of construction workers. The piece named Edmund Ashbury and Della Marchetti. It ran on page 3 of the Sunday edition, beside a photograph of the conservatory taken from the riverside, the dome catching morning light. Wesley declined every television request. He kept his daytime hours at the wood shop, the smell of cedar and tung oil in the rafters. In the evenings, he began drawing again at the kitchen table, small graphite studies of an education wing, light wells, low benches, doorways scaled for an 8-year-old to feel grown. He worked with the radio low and a glass of water beside the page. Marin came by the shop twice. The first time she brought engineering files in a leather portfolio and stayed only 20 minutes, asking precise questions about load tolerances and HVAC routing in a tone Wesley recognized from his old colleagues at Farron and Halsey, the tone of someone who had read the documents twice before the meeting. The second time, she brought 2 sandwiches and coffee from the place on King Street. They ate lunch at the workbench, talking about brass fittings, about Henley's new interest in birds, about a book she had read in college and was now rereading. She left before 2 in the afternoon. She did not ask when she could come again. Wesley did not need her to. Della was officially restored to her post Director of Preservation, with newly granted independent sign-off authority that bypassed the Executive Director's office. The board had named an interim director to replace Trent and had begun a national search. Trent received an indictment from the South Carolina Attorney General's office. He did not contest. His attorney negotiated a guilty plea on document fraud, a suspended sentence, and a fine that ate the equity in his Mount Pleasant house. At the close of the hearing, he passed Wesley in the hallway outside the courtroom. He opened his mouth to say something. Wesley only looked at him and gave a single nod, no anger, no absolution. Trent turned away. Henley had a small art exhibit at his elementary school in early December. Wesley came. Marin came too, without telling either of them in advance. She sat in the back row, in the parent section, not the VIP chairs reserved for guests. Henley spotted her and waved, his face going bright with a kind of surprise he did not yet know how to hide. After the exhibit, the 3 of them walked over to Marion Square for ice cream. Henley ran ahead with his cone in one hand and his sketchbook in the other. Wesley and Marin walked behind, not holding hands, but their shoulders brushed when they stepped aside for a couple passing the other way. "I read Light and Bone again," Marin said. "There's a line I keep returning to. Good architecture knows when to be silent. Catherine wrote that line," Wesley said. "I just signed the book with her." Marin nodded and did not say anything more. That night, after putting Henley to bed, Wesley sat at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and wrote one email to Marin. "I'll take the education wing commission. One condition: Henley sits in on some of the meetings. He should know what his father does." Marin replied 4 minutes later. "Agreed. I'll have the contract drawn. And Wesley, thank you." Wesley did not write back. He closed the laptop and went out onto the small porch in the cold, looked up at the December sky over the dogwood branches, and said quietly to no one, "I think you would have liked her, Catherine." Wind moved in the live oaks. Henley's bedroom light was still on. The boy was drawing before sleep. 4 months later, April, the groundbreaking for the conservatory's education wing. Wesley stood beside Marin on a small platform on the south lawn, this time officially introduced as lead architect. His name printed on the program in full, no initials. Henley stood between them in a clip-on tie, holding a child-sized ceremonial shovel he had been allowed to push into the soil alongside the adults. The Charleston spring had come in early. The magnolias were already in bud, and the air smelled of damp earth and cut grass. Edmund Ashbury was there too, in his wheelchair beneath the magnolia, a thin blue blanket on his lap. He nodded to Wesley, a quiet nod between two men who had once kept the same secret. Della stood with the preservation team in a navy blazer, beaming. She had been invited to consult on materials for the new building and had spent the past month sourcing reclaimed heart pine from a torn-down rice mill outside Georgetown. After the ceremony, Marin and Wesley walked the perimeter together, checking the orange survey stakes. Henley followed, asking about the excavator, the cement trucks, the panes of glass stacked under tarps in the staging yard. "My father was admitted to the hospital last week," Marin said, voice low. "The doctors say he may not see the summer." Wesley stopped walking. "I'm very sorry." She nodded. "He told me he just wanted to see this groundbreaking. Last night he said this was the best thing he ever invested in. He didn't mean the money." Wesley placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, not long, just a beat, and let it fall again. It was the first time he had touched her. She did not look at him when his hand left, and he was grateful for it. Henley ran up and tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, let's go look at that machine over there." Wesley smiled and let himself be pulled. Marin watched them go, smiling. In Asheville, North Carolina, where he had moved after the trial, Trent Hollister read about the groundbreaking on the local paper's website. He closed the laptop and stared out the window for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his son, the boy he had never publicly acknowledged. The first call in 6 months. It was short. It was awkward. The boy called him Sir, but it was a beginning, and Trent did not pretend otherwise. That evening, Wesley invited Marin home for the first time. She brought a bottle of wine, a soft Italian red, she had been saving without knowing for what, and offered to cook. She said she could only make one dish, spaghetti, a red sauce her mother had taught her 30 years ago and she had never improved on. Henley pronounced it really good and asked for seconds. After the meal, Henley fell asleep on the couch under a quilt Catherine had made the year before Henley was born, white squares with small patterned crosses, hand-stitched in the months Catherine could no longer stand for long. Wesley and Marin washed dishes side by side at the sink in silence. Yellow lamplight reflected on the kitchen window, doubling them. Outside, a single porch light burned at the neighbor's house across the street. Marin dried her hands on a dish towel and turned to him. "I should head home." Wesley nodded. He walked her to the door. Before she stepped out, he said, "Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for inviting me." She walked down the porch steps, turned at the bottom, gave him one nod, and was gone. Autumn the following year. The conservatory's education wing was complete. The opening was small families of the construction workers, the scholarship students, conservatory staff, a handful of close donors. No press, no champagne towers, a potluck in the south courtyard, plates of deviled eggs and baked ham and Ben wafers, a folding table covered with a white cloth, and a single pot of yellow chrysanthemums in the center. Edmund Ashbury had passed 3 months earlier, in his sleep. in the room with the harbor view. Marin wore her father's lapel pin on the collar of her gray coat, a small bronze pin shaped like the conservatory's dome. Wesley stood beneath the new dome, a smaller version of the main one, designed at child scale for the central learning room. Late afternoon light came through the copper and glass panels and laid leaf patterns across the wood floor, the same pattern Henley had once traced on the granite wall outside. Henley, 9 years old now, taller by 3 inches than he had been the night they were turned away, ran through the rooms acting as an unofficial guide for the scholarship kids, pointing out the low benches, the chalkboards, the woodshop bench he had helped his father sand. In his hand was the sketchbook, the 4th one now, the cover already softened at the corners. Marin and Wesley stood at the back of the small crowd. They did not go up to speak. Marin spoke quietly to him. "My father asked me to put one thing here after he was gone. You don't need to look at it now, but I want you to know." Wesley waited. Marin pointed to a small bronze plaque mounted in a corner near the doorway, modest, easy to miss. The lettering was simple. "This education wing is dedicated to Catherine Coltrane, 1982 to 2020, who said, 'Make the light fall where people need it most,' and to Edmund Ashbury, 1952 to 2026, who kept his promise." Wesley stood still a long time. He did not cry. He laid his hand against the plaque and ran his thumb across Catherine's name, then across Edmund's. Marin stood beside him and said nothing. She let him have the silence. At last Wesley turned to her. "Marin." It was the first time he had said her first name without her surname. "Wesley," she answered. The first time, too. They did not embrace. They did not kiss. They stood beneath the small dome side by side, a hand's width of air between them, and watched Henley lead the other children through the bands of late copper light on the floor. "Catherine used to say, 'Good architecture knows when to be silent,'" Wesley said. She was right. A long pause. Then Wesley said, "Would you like to have dinner with us tonight? Henley is learning to make grilled cheese. He's very serious about the butter." Marin looked at him and smiled. "Yes, I'd like that." Henley came running up and grabbed both their hands. "Dad, Miss Marin, come look at this part." The light hits the floor in a circle, like a clock. They followed him. The afternoon light kept falling through the dome exactly where it needed to fall.